Allegra. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Special Populations Outreach Advocate at Access on our sexual abuse team. We can talk a little bit more about what that means going forward, and I'm really excited to do this today.
And hi, my name is Anasia, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I also work for Access. I am on our domestic abuse team as our youth and campus advocate. So I work primarily with populations 24 and under, and we can tell you a lot more about Access as a whole in a second here. I'm excited to be here. Thank you. Go ahead.
And A, were you going to share your screen, or did you want one of us to share our screen?
I've got it.
Awesome.
Okay. Awesome. We just have a couple slides here just to kind of help you all see what we're talking about.
There it comes. Yep.
Visually.
Awesome. So that's our information and how you spell our names. And if anyone has specific questions about what these positions mean, I am happy to answer questions about my position, and I'm sure Anasia would be as well. So next slide, whenever you can.
I'll just jump us off right here and talk about our domestic abuse services. It is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It is also Child Abuse and Prevention Awareness Month. But we're just going to talk in general about our services for domestic abuse at this time. So we offer 24-hour domestic abuse crisis line. All of our services are offered 24/7 for that crisis line. So people can call that. All the lines will be posted at the end, but I can also tell you that right now, that's 515-292-0519, just so that you're aware. That's not a number that someone can text, but we can talk a little bit more about like other ways that you can contact us through texting and email, so that in case making a telephone call is not something that would work for you all. We have DART, which is a domestic abuse response team, which is when we respond to domestic abuse in our counties that we serve. And that response can look different just depending on who that survivor is, like whether or not that survivor is 10 years old or whether or not they are 80 years old. It's very catered to that person and what services they might need, whether they need criminal justice advocacy and legal advocacy, or they need hospital intervention. It just really is very focused on who they are. Community education and training. So we do plenty of things like this where we get to talk to folks and engage with you all in the community. Pre-COVID, you'd see us in person, like come check us out. And now we just kind of go with the flow and however we can to make sure services are still being out there. And then we do one-on-one counseling services with our folks. You can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Anasia. And like Anasia said, it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So thank you all for coming to this to learn a little bit more about not only the sexual assault awareness itself, but also awareness of the services that are provided in our area. We also provide a 24-hour sexual assault crisis line, similar to the domestic assault line. It is open all the time. You will get connected with an advocate. You cannot text that number, but you can call it. And that is 292-5378. I don't know why it suddenly left my brain. And we'll also have those at the end of this as well. We also do SART. That is the 24-hour, again, in-person response to victims in need, meaning if someone presents at a hospital or at a police department stating that they were sexually abused, we will respond to that. That did look a little different at different points throughout COVID, but as of right now, we are doing in-person responses with COVID precautions in place, both at ERs and in police departments. It can also happen at dorm rooms and sometimes at homes, although that happens less often. Again, we provide that criminal justice and legal advocacy. If that is the route that a survivor chooses to go down, we can help them kind of go through that process and explain it to them so they don't have to do it by themselves. And we also provide community education and training like this presentation. And then again, sexual abuse counseling for primary and secondary survivors. The reason I bring up secondary survivors is we just see this a little more in the sexual abuse realm. And that means someone who is directly connected with someone who's a primary survivor, such as a family member, a friend, a roommate who wasn't the direct victim of the crime.
Thank you for bringing that up. Totally forgot to mention secondary survivors.
Yep,
we definitely help secondary.
Well, so
yeah,
I apologize.
And that's through all. Go ahead.
Oh,
That's through all of our services that we help secondary survivors too. So just if you have a friend that's been harmed and you feel like you just don't know what to do, you can also call us and we can help you out and help you figure out how to go forward from there, whether it's just focusing on your healing or whether it's how can you help them with their healing. And
Tanya
we
has a good,
serve
oh yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Greene, Boone, Marshall, Tama, and Story counties. So just straight across I-30, I guess, those 5 counties.
A lot of people have the misconception that we only serve Ames or we only serve Story County. And while we do cover, we probably have the most people there just because it's the most population. We do serve all 5 of those counties. Anasia and I both are advocates who pre-COVID were driving across those counties. We still do provide those services. It looks a little different because of COVID, but that hasn't stopped just because there's a pandemic going on. It just looks a little different now.
And so our housing services are pretty unique to their own world, but our housing services, they serve all of our clients. So whether our survivors seeking shelter are from domestic abuse situations, sexual abuse, homicide, violent crimes, any type of victim advocacy that we serve can use our housing services. It's for safety concerns, so our locations aren't disclosed, but they also have a 24-hour crisis line. I'll give that to you, but again, that's posted at the end. That is 515-292-0543. And so you can reach that number 24/7 as well. After hours for all of our crisis lines, so after 5 o'clock, so like right now, our crisis lines are rolled to a state line, and then they get in touch with the local advocate, and so that we can make sure you're provided services by someone who knows the area, who knows the resources, and can help you out. That housing advocacy looks like literally living in one of our spaces that we have. It can also look like financial services to help you get into a place. If maybe say you were assaulted by a roommate, it might be a little bit different situation. For domestic violence, that wouldn't really fall under domestic violence. If you were sexually assaulted, but it would fall under our services. And so it really just depends again on that individual's situation. We have served hate crime as well, survivors. And so if that hate crime was perpetrated on them by a roommate, that's something then we would help in that situation. So helping them figure out how to get out of their lease or how to help that navigate that conversation with the landlord, so that they still feel safe in their where they're laying their head at night, whether it's in a place that we provided like our shelters, which are apartments, or whether it's getting them into student housing if they're a student so that they can be able to get out of the apartment they're living in Ames or Marshalltown or wherever. So just whatever we can do to be creative is what our housing team does. And they're pretty awesome about finding creative solutions. You know, that cousin you didn't think about, we helping you figure that out. And then we have food and clothing donations. A lot of time goes to our housing team as well. If you're ever interested in donating food or clothing, we ask that you aren't a client that we serve because all of our services are free and we don't want to receive anything that might seem like a payment of services or something. If you're not a client though, just give us a call if you want to donate something and we can tell you if we have that kind of space or capacity. I think that's it. You got anything to add to housing?
I just wanted to add that, like you mentioned, that our shelters are actually apartments. So what scattered site means is that they are not one big shelter, like when people think of a shelter space. And this is kind of like, it's backed by different research that's been done on empowerment of survivors and privacy of survivors, giving them that space. So there is an office in one of them, but like it's not staffed 24/7 because we want to make sure that survivors feel safe and that they have privacy as well, which I think is pretty cool. But our housing team is awesome. Anasia and I are not on the housing team, but we both worked on housing cases, and the housing team is invaluable. We really appreciate them a lot.
And our with those scattered sites, none of our locations are gender based. Our locations are service based. So like the people that are in the unit that has an office in it are people that really have high needs and high concerns, so that we can have a volunteer or an advocate in that space to be able to help them regardless of gender. And then our other spaces, again, are regardless of gender or orientation. Those spaces are just, again, needs based. So like this one is really close to downtown and we had an opening space, and this one needed somebody in it. This one's really close to rural Iowa and they needed to be closer to there for their job. And we happen to have a space at that one. The spaces are just kind of, these are the people that need these kind of safety concerns, and that's who is in there. So even when we had our show 3 years ago, the big brick and mortar building, it wasn't gender-based as well. It was just, we moved people around to make sure everybody was okay.
Sorry, we were handling an internet thing if you saw me talking out the side of my mouth there. And then finally, last but not least, we also have our homicide and violent crime services. This slide looks a little bit different because those services look a little bit different. Our homicide and violent crime also, they serve 3 counties. They serve Boone, Story, and Marshall County because the funding looks a little different than our other programs, but that's still within Access's service area. So we do have this specific program. And they provide advocacy services to surviving victims of murder, attempted murder, robbery, extortion, burglary, arson, kidnapping, felony assaults, homicide and serious injury by vehicle, and as Anasia said, hate crimes. If the hate crime does involve something that falls under domestic violence or sexual abuse, then the sexual abuse team or the domestic violence team would take that case on as well. These services are going to be the same as what we said before with the other 3 teams, is how we would call them at Access, but they also do assist with death notifications and funeral arrangements when we're talking about the first couple crimes listed there.
And I think the one crime that we did forget to mention on there is stalking. I don't know if you mentioned that, but we do serve stalking survivors as well. And again, if that stalking falls under because of something related to sexual assault or domestic abuse, it gets kind of pushed out to those teams. If it doesn't fall under one of those 2, it goes to the homicide and violent crimes. And then again, housing serves everyone.
Mm-hmm. And we do often do co-advocacy because we understand that these crimes can have a lot of overlap. And in that instance, we may do co-advocacy where there are multiple advocates working with one person across teams, depending on what's appropriate for that person's needs and on caseload. The other crime that I didn't bring up that we do serve is trafficking, both human sex trafficking and human labor trafficking. We do provide services for that as well. That usually falls on the sexual abuse team, but we may be bringing in members from the other teams as well to make sure that those folks are getting their needs met.
Awesome. Next.
Awesome. You kind of touched on already, Anasia, but I wanted to make sure we had it written down.
Oh yeah, I had a stock in there. There we go. But yeah, again, so there's the counties we serve once again, just so that you're aware. They are typed out there from Green all the way over to Tama. And then just that little nook in the middle is our homicide and violence crime. And so we do honor those protected classes and provide services to anyone that needs those services, anyone that is a survivor. So gender and gender identity, sexuality, religion, class, race, ethnicity, and political affiliation, as well as your ableism. None of those are a reason that would not give you services. We do not provide services for people that cause harm to abusers. If sometimes they do call and say like, judge told me I need to get services before I can do X, Y, and Z. And we just redirect them to where they need to go if we know. Sometimes we don't know where they can go to get services, but a lot of times we just redirect them then to their parole officers. We, in our services, only provide those services to victims and survivors.
And that's not to say that someone who has caused harm can't also be a victim, but in those cases, we do have to consider potential conflicts of interest as far as providing services. That is something that would be discussed with our supervisors to determine if it's appropriate for us to take that case on and do what we call siloing. So making sure maybe like if it's this situation and this situation, we make sure just this advocate's working on it and this supervisor. That's pretty rare that would happen. But if for some reason that doesn't work, we would also refer out to surrounding services because we do recognize that someone who causes harm may have also a history of being abused, or maybe they're abused in the future. They still deserve services, but it has to be specific to the survivor aspect, the victim aspect, not the perpetrator aspect, because we are not qualified to provide those services.
And those services are, we also provide general services, like when we do those programming it's so weird with the pandemic to kind of articulate what I'm trying to say. But like, for instance, I went and spoke to groups on campus quite often, whether it was LGBT group or whether it was the fraternity and sorority, like in talking about particular services that we provide where we saw different barriers with different groups and talking to them and making it more catered to that group to let them know about our services, because like maybe they don't need to know about our rural services because they're in Ames, Iowa, and we're talking about ISU. And so we make sure it's more so they hear about what services we provide for them. So we do those services, and of course we don't know who's in the audience with those. We just make those so that everybody knows what the resources are.
And that kind of falls under what we'd call primary prevention and secondary prevention. Primary prevention, I'm not going to get into the weeds because that's a whole presentation on its own and it's really important. But we do some prevention programming, meaning we are talking about systemic change, cultural change, with the understanding that it takes a lot of time, and education to prevent crimes before they happen by having those conversations about things like consent. I know Anasia has done a lot with safe dates with teens, and reaching out not only to the colleges, but also the area's high schools and occasionally middle schools. Sometimes they don't want us there, sometimes they do. We also, I have trained police officers on things like human trafficking and working with human trafficking survivors. So we also work with other community agencies. I will get to what that means. It doesn't mean we work for them. We are a separate agency. We do a lot of training on, if you don't know how to talk to survivors, most of the training, not all of it, is make sure that we're there, that kind of conversation. But we can get into what that looks like, those community partnerships, what those look like in the next couple slides. I think I included that.
You want me to start or you want to start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we just, for LGBTQ specific concerns, a lot of the things that we talk about with them, first, I would say a lot of the clients I've had, the first thing we talk about is local resources, because I never know if that's the only time I'm gonna get an opportunity to talk with them. And that's with any of our clients, but specifically with marginalized groups. So if they call and they talk to me and I never hear from them again, I wanna make sure that they know all the resources in that area. So if someone calls me and I'm using Ames because I'm currently in Ames, but if they call and they're in Ames and I'm like, well, how old are you? So if they're 17, because I'm the youth advocate, I make sure that they're connected with teachers I know at those schools that are either accepting or that's their job, or they are more welcoming, or if they're, in college, making sure they get connected to the right offices that can help them. And so a lot of times those local resources, people just don't know about them. And so that's one thing that as an advocate, you want to make sure you're connecting them to everyone that can get them the help they need. And then people that aren't going to judge them by like their gender or their identity, was just one I wanted to start out with. And I'll let Allegra kind of jump from there.
Sure. And yeah, absolutely. Advocates wear many hats. As you saw, the different, those slides that we had at the beginning that talked about our services, that can look like a lot of different things. And one of the hats we wear is kind of being a resource hub. So if what I often tell people I'm working with is, if I don't know the answer to the question, you can still ask, because I will find someone who does know the answer. Right. That's part of my job. And I'm happy to do that. But I wanted to bring up in this presentation that Access is aware that there are LGBTQ plus specific concerns when we're talking about being a survivor or victim of crime. And I just want to make sure that we laid those out in case either you weren't aware or you weren't aware that Access was aware. It's an awkward way to say that, but I'm an awkward person. So specifically, the first one I want to bring up is that historical concerns about law enforcement involvement. Because I mentioned the fact that we do sometimes train law enforcement, or that we do things like legal advocacy or involvement with criminal justice system, I want to make it clear that working with Access does not mean that you need to have reported what happened. And it does not mean you need to be involved with the criminal justice system or law enforcement in any way. If that's something that a survivor comes to us and they are not interested in reporting to like official, we're also official, but official channels like that, they do not have to do that. They can still receive services from us. We operate on a model called Start by Believing, meaning someone's coming to us, we believe that what they told us, that they are a survivor of the crime, and then we go from there as far as what does this service look like for this person, which means it's victim-centered.
And what does the survivor want?
Yeah, what does the
Yeah.
survivor want? Not what does the advocate want, not what does the police officer want. And that's not to say if someone does want to be involved with the criminal justice system in that way that they can't be. We will help them navigate that as well. Like, yeah, what does the survivor want? And then we go from there. We're all, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when you were saying what the survivor wants, a lot of time what the survivor wants also really surrounds whether or not they're out when we're talking about LGBTQ specific. I've had plenty of clients where they were younger, because like I said, I work a lot with 24 and under, where they have not fully embraced their true selves yet, and because of whatever reason. And so just trying to help them navigate that conversation seems to be a big part of my job in general, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's domestic abuse and they're not even supposed to be dating or something yet. But helping them navigate that conversation with the folks in their life. And so being like, just sitting down with them and just being like, what is it that you want to say to these people or this person in your life so that they can be part of your healing, or that they can be part of your support system. So we try to make sure that we help them identify who is part of their support system, because that can look different, especially a college student that might be out in this neighborhood and not out in small town, wherever they came from or something.
There's also, when we're talking about specifically dating relationships, but not just dating relationships, dating and sex, when we're talking about that and the LGBTQI community, there isn't really much positive or healthy portrayal of that relationship type in mainstream media. It has gotten better. So I am an older millennial, you can probably tell by the side part, but I recently did a presentation on this specific thing, and I mentioned what I grew up with was maybe the L word, which if you're familiar with that, those relationships aren't particularly healthy. But that was the main media that I knew about growing up at the time that had that representation. It has improved, but we are aware that there's just not as many models for what healthy relationships might look like or how that may be different when we're talking about heteronormativity, heterosexism, all that level of stuff. And those are some of the things that we aim to talk about and change in these kinds of programs.
And one of the things we do to make sure we're not isolating out, so that LGBTQ can come and receive services, so that they know that we provide those services, is that when just monitoring language when we're talking. Like I said, I go into a lot of schools, and so I try to make sure that I'm very I don't want to say strategic, but just making sure I'm very knowledgeable about the fact that I'm not going to go in there and be like your boyfriend, your girlfriend over and over again, or assuming that I know who someone is going to date. So, and I use that for myself. I say partner all the time. So that way it's in my day-to-day life, so that when I am in schools or when I am in the community and talking to officers as well, I'm using the term partner, so that it is more normalized for those agencies, those partner agencies that we work with as well, helping them be able to use that language, because a lot of times they will assume. So if you like this survivor and you say their pronouns, they assume the opposite pronouns for that partner. And so making sure that we normalize that already in middle school when I'm talking to them, so that by the time they're the college students, this is just like a normal conversation. It's not, I hate to use the word normal, but this is your average conversation. This is just something that's day to day when we talk about our partners. And so I think that helps a lot of our clients too, is that I don't assume whoever they're talking to. I'm like, I do a lot of intimate partner violence. So being like, okay, who harmed you? Asking what's their name, asking things that they will want to share with me, rather than just making those assumptions.
And that's the same in the sexual abuse team as well, making sure we're not making assumptions about perpetrators. One other thing I wanted to bring up too is that we do normalize sharing of pronouns and start that conversation by saying our pronouns first. I think most, if not all staff, it may not be all staff, but a vast majority of the staff have their pronouns in their email as well. And it's been normalized in not only in our external conversations, but also in our internal meetings when we have presenters or when we are going to other trainings. We make sure that we share our pronouns at that time too. Another thing that we're aware of, and Anasia touched on this when we talked about our shelter spaces, is that many people in the LGBTQIA community may feel like they can't come forward because if they need shelter, they may feel that they may be turned away. One thing that we're trying really hard to change about how people refer to access is we are not a women's shelter. We have shelter services, but it is not gendered. Those services are available to anyone who is a survivor of crime. And we have, we're constantly learning and making sure that that is more and more affirming. But if you were to come in, regardless of your gender expression, if you are a survivor of crime, then you would be eligible for us to provide assistance with housing. We may be shelter full, but that's I can't guarantee that you would have housing, but we have
funds.
Yeah, we have creative housing staff who work if that is the case. We are aware that there may be other services that help with homelessness prevention or shelter services that may not be gender affirming or may be specific to like women shelters, men shelters, and we take that into account when we're doing referrals as well.
Yes, I think that's pretty good on that one. Yep. I know we touched on a lot of this as well. I got ahead with the gender affirming language, but it's always good to be affirming. So we got to keep going with that. And it goes back to what Allegra said with that start by believing. We want to believe their story, and in order to do that, you need to be affirming of everything they're saying. We have something called like the Baser model, and that second part is first part is believing them, the second part is affirming. And so you just want to make sure you're affirming when you're talking to your friends and family members, if they're a survivor, if you're the survivor, and you're telling your story to someone and they don't believe you, understanding that like that's them, that's not on you, and that there are people out there that do believe you and that are here to believe you, and that's us too. So we are here to kind of make sure it's survivor centered, that this is about you, because power and control was taken away from you, and we're here to help make sure you are able to be empowered again, for our survivors and for our secondary survivors.
Yeah. Real quick too, there's language on this slide that you may not be familiar with. The Housing First model specifically talks about if someone is struggling with homelessness, and in our case, because of, or the threat of homelessness because of being a victim of violence, that getting someone housing is the #1 priority for our housing team. We often do co-advocacy with them to make sure those counseling services are there as well. But again, that kind of focuses on understanding that when people have a stable living situation, then they can address other concerns more easily. So we do operate on that housing first model. We already mentioned that law enforcement or criminal justice reporting is not required for services, and we are always free and confidential. And some people have a question about what that means, because therapists say they're confidential, but they are mandatory reporters. In the state of Iowa, and I just did a training on this, so I know that I just did a training with this with our legal TA folks. In the state of Iowa, advocates are permissive reporters. We are not mandatory reporters. That means we don't report the same things that mandatory reporters would. And by always free, I mean you don't have to show us any insurance. You don't have to show us any pay stubs to get the basic services. If you're going through housing, there's discussions about that, but that doesn't
right.
That's a big long thing. But that doesn't mean you're not going to get services or have to pay for them. Our services at Access are always free.
And if you're one of those legal people and you want to look it up, I think it's Iowa Code 915.20, I think.
Yeah, I always have a copy when I go on responses, because it also has
you can look at that.
Because we're permissive reporters, we actually get to go a lot of places that other support systems may not be allowed to go. For example, if you are involved with the criminal justice system, we can be at trials, and we can also be at depositions. This looks a little different with COVID-19. We can get into that if people have questions, but that is a place that we are normally allowed legally,
right.
because of our permissive reporter status and confidentiality status in this state. It's very difficult to have us act as a witness in a case that we're working on.
And that works a lot with youth as well. So sometimes if the person causing harm was one of the caregivers, officers might not let the the non-offending caregiver in, because they don't know the dynamic between the two caregivers. And so we can go back with that minor. So like I've gone back and sat with like someone that's not 18 at least, and been back there because, you know, this parent that was not offending couldn't go back there because of that. And making sure that like that kid's voice is still being heard to a certain degree. You know, we make sure that kid isn't saying a bunch of stuff without an attorney present, but making sure that young folks know that they have rights as well, and rights to privacy.
100%. Another thing that I didn't mention here when we were talking about the legal stuff is we can help get people paired up with legal services. We can't necessarily pay for them, and we cannot provide legal services, but we, again, there's that resource hub aspect. We can get you connected to services like legal aid.
Right.
And then last but definitely not least, the services access. Some staff are trained specifically in LGBT plus barriers, issues, and I want to say joy as well, because I know that this can be a lot of heavy stuff. Not all staff are. I'm not going to say that
Right.
we all have additional training, but all staff have access to the trained staff to make sure services are provided appropriately. We do regular, with client permission, we will do regular staffing with other advocates. I am one of those folks who's trained on it, probably could assume that, and so is Anasia, because we're doing this presentation. And I am always happy to have those conversations with fellow staff, and I have had many conversations with people who maybe they haven't had training or don't understand how to ask for pronouns or why we're using pronouns that way if they're new to access. And I can sit with them, and that's part of my position as the special populations advocate, to have those conversations with staff and to help them navigate those services.
And on our domestic abuse team and our housing team, we don't have a position that's titled special population. So all of our teams have names that are a little similar and a little different here and there, little sprinkles. But we make sure that, like she said, that everyone is aware of where they can find that knowledge that they need it. You know, I've gone through like Forge training and Iowa Safe Schools, working with them and all those different type of programs that can help combat those barriers that might not fall under any of our heterosexual relationships that maybe might fit more on the spectrum. And so that we make sure that we let them know, like, hey, this is, you know, a better way to approach that situation. So that a survivor still feels welcomed.
Yeah, maybe we won't refer this person to this shelter, and this is, and I'll explain why, and maybe we would want to refer them here if we aren't able to house that person for if we're full, for example. Having those conversations. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep.
I think that's
good. I did forget something before we go on to the next slide. So there is going to be content, like a basic content warning for the next slide, because we're going to talk about the power and control wheel. I usually put a slide in about self-care and contents before, so I didn't do that this time. So if anyone does need to leave, that's absolutely fine. We're not going to take that personally. We aren't going to get into like gritty details of anything, but it can still be distressing to talk about that. So I just want people to be prepared, since we're going to have the image up in the next slide. And Anasia, I'll kind of let you start that part.
Awesome. So here's the power and control wheel. I guess I'll start out by saying, if you were to type in power and control wheel on Google, you would see like 50 million of them pop up. Not 50 million, but that's my mother's favorite thing to say. But you would see quite a lot of them pop up. And they're very catered to what that particular situation is. And so that's why we chose this one specifically for this presentation. Like I use the teen power control wheel a lot because it talks more about the aspects of unmarried couples to deal with, so to work with. So here we just kind of have on the outside where you talk a lot about, we see heterosexism, transphobia, biphobia, homophobia. Those are things people might know blanketed about. Same thing with physical and sexual violence. But with inside that circle are a lot of the things that we tend to not talk about or not think about. And so that's a lot of what you see here in front of you, like using isolation. Most people hear the term domestic violence or sexual assault and they think instantly rape or physically assaulted someone when they're in the hospital. And they tend to forget about all these other things, like using isolation could be deleting your friends off of social media, you know, telling you who you can and can't hang out with, saying like, you know, and especially in same-sex relationships, we see this where they're like, well, I should be in that group or club too, because it is a women's group or it is a men's group, when that's not related to anything they're interested in. And so, but they're using that as a form of power and control.
And another one that you'd see on what we call like the original power and control wheels, you'd see it says using male privilege. And under this one, it specifically says using privilege because you may be two women in a relationship. There's no male privilege in that, but there's still a possibility that most likely someone has more privilege in that relationship. If someone is able-bodied, if someone is white, if someone has more money, like all of those things can be used in a same-sex relationship as well. So that's why we would use this one. Some other specific things that might happen in intimate partner violence or sexual abuse when we're talking about same-sex relationships or LGBTQIA relationships is threatening to out someone is a type of control that can be used. Threatening to cut someone off from access to hormones or other gender affirming care is something that can happen. And those can fall under both domestic and sexual abuse, depending on the context. And if it makes sense to reach out, reach out. That's if you aren't sure, reach out and we can talk about what it means and how you get referred to access. I know there's a couple of questions that were up before and we can address those. But yeah, this is just one tool that you can use. But if you ever have questions, you can always reach out and ask too, and you would get a hold of someone who can help you process that.
And one last one that I want to make sure I touch on is the minimize, denying, and blame. We see that coming from so many different aspects is why I always touch on that one, because we see that coming from not only from the person causing harm, the perpetrator, it also comes from the victim and from their community groups, from society. So, you'll see the victim blame themselves all the time. And people are like, oh, that's just sad or something. But like, that's what's happening from that abuser. They're making sure that that's what's ingrained in them. And then and of course, the person causing harm is not gonna say it's their fault, but we also see our communities. And so like as a community, that's something we want to work on and make sure we're doing better with is if we hear somebody's situation and they're like, well, they got mad, my partner got mad and that's why they hit me or something, because I knew I should have not did this because I know that makes them mad. And we're like, well, yeah, why would you do something that makes them mad? Instead of being like, I'm sorry, that's what happened to you. What can I do to help or something, And so just making sure we aren't adding on to what that abuser is already doing to that person, whether it's judging what they were wearing to why didn't you leave and everything in between.
And even more specifically on that denying, minimizing, blaming, specific to LGBT plus relationships, people in the spectrum, in the rainbow spectrum, is in the community or even outside of the community. If you are trying to get support, you may hear things like, well, women can't abuse women, or men can't abuse men, or
who wears the pants.
Relationships are, of course, they're going to move that fast, or there's a lot of different stereotypes and conversations that can happen, not just outside the community, but within the community that can be minimizing. And that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking about that larger picture as well, specifically with the LGBTQ plus population. I know that we all like to say, are the straights okay? But I've done a lot of education on this, and we have to keep in mind that just because straight relationships are often portrayed as unhealthy does not mean that portrayals of same-sex relationships or queer relationships are portrayed as healthy, and that there may actually, because of this minimizing, there may be additional danger because you might not be taken seriously by potential supports.
Yeah, especially when people they feel like you aren't fitting a rigid gender role. A lot of people in society will definitely try to find blame in that or minimize your survivorship because of that. And so that's something that as a community we can also kind of make sure we're checking people that are saying that kind of stuff, that heteronormative language, or being like, well, which one's the guy in the relationship, like stupid stuff like that. Like we can easily shut down, versus some deep rooted stuff we can easily be like, what do you mean which one's the guy? If they both are males and they both identify as males, then they're both the guy. And being able to you can nip that in the bud rather quickly, rather than maybe possibly doing damage if we just sit idly by.
And if anyone is interested in doing more in-depth conversations or presentations on that, we'd be happy to do that. My contact info is at the end. And I think we're kind of coming up on the end of our prepared stuff here. But we could talk about this topic because this is what Anasia and I do every day. We could talk about this probably enough to fill a whole college couple lectures on it, but we won't do that to you today, but we'd be happy to go in more depth in the future. And I'm hoping to actually do that more, but I don't want to, go over the time. I know there's a couple questions that were sent beforehand, and I want to address those too. But
yeah, let's see the next one.
I think the next slide is
I think it's the info, right?
Yeah.
So real quick, just to touch on our social media, we try to make sure things like this are listed on there. We do work, all of our advocates that handle things like social media and culture things and all that are also working with clients. So sometimes things don't get listed out there, but you can always find any way to contact us. You can also do that through social media. So if you, for whatever reason, can't call us, you can reach out through our website. It has a chat line on our website, which is the saltcarecenter.org. And then you can also send not just the chat line on there, you can send an email through our website. If you send it through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, it might not be monitored right away. The website does go directly to our director as well. So just so be aware that that does go to our director. And then she sends that out to the proper team to help that individual. And there's the crisis lines that we mentioned earlier as well.
My work cell, you can text the work cell number on mine. Be aware if it's after 5 o'clock, I probably won't see it until I'm in the office the next day. But that's also absolutely a perfectly fine way to get a hold of me on that number. If you're more comfortable with texting as opposed to email, that's fine. Just if you haven't spoken with me before, let me know why you're contacting me, so I'm not like, yeah, sure, is this a client who changed their number? So just give me a heads up as to why you would be reaching out. But I am happy to, whatever makes the most sense for you as far as outreach, you can use those different avenues.
And I'll say the same thing. I won't be in this position as long as Allegra. I've been in it a very long time, since 2013. But that number, my number there, can also be used to text as well. And it will stay with the youth advocate. So I'm constantly leaving that number at schools, whether it's elementary school all the way up, I'm leaving it there so that they can know that. And I get texts all the time. Just like Allegra, if it's after 5, I might not see it. And even if I do see it, I won't respond probably until I'm working. But it's good because kids will text and just be like, hey, I have a question. And I don't say like, well, who is this? Where you at? Where you live? It's just, what's your question?
Yep.
And so that way I can answer that question in a more directed manner, and just making sure that we're focused on the question and not who this person's identity is, what their identity is.
The stalking and trafficking phone numbers would most likely, you would contact the SA number. No, stalking would be DA.
Yeah.
And trafficking would be SA. I know that's a little confusing. Ultimately, though, if you only know one number and you call that, that's okay, because we will get the person on the line will get you to the right phone number. So if you are in a crisis and you call the DA line, but it was the domestic abuse line or assault line, and it was actually a sexual abuse case, that's okay. We will get you to the right person. Right. You're not going to bother. You're not going to upset us. Right. The advocate will still treat you with respect and make sure you get connected to the right resources.
So all of our crimes that aren't clear, you like that this is domestic abuse or this is sexual abuse, just call any line that what number you have saved so that we can get you to the advocate you need. Yep. Because again, most of those crimes usually have different aspects in them and different other levels to them that it might fall under something else, and we can figure out where the best advocate to help you out is, or to help your friend, family. Yep. Any questions, other questions?
I know A had some that they were going to read that were prior questions. We also feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We will not read people's names. It's very hard to surprise us. It's very hard to upset us. We want to answer your questions.
Sure. All right. Well, I think a lot of these questions were answered in your presentation. But just to reiterate, let's see here. How are staff trained to support emergency situations such as an LGBTQ plus person needing to leave a violent situation quickly?
Okay. I think we touched on it a little bit. I'll elaborate on what we said earlier to make it more clear. When they are in crisis, what we would do first initially is just making the first question most of us ask is, are you safe? So when they call, or if police called, ask them, hey, are you currently safe? And then if they say like no, being like, okay, well, let's go forward from there. Where can you go to be safe? And finding out those initial questions. But to back up, I want to say how we're trained first to do that. All advocates go through initial 40-hour training, which is even our volunteers that turn into interns go through that same training. From there, advocates go a step above that if we're going to be paid staff rather than volunteers and interns, and we go through more training. Those trainings are usually facilitated by the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault, as well as the Collective Change. And those organizations provide plenty of different trainings regarding advocacy and victim services. As well as with those trainings, we do continuing education throughout the year. So like when we were saying things like Forge is a training that some of us go through to help, or we go through webinars and stuff from national organizations as well to get trained.
Other organizations to be like NSVRC, Safe Schools, anything that is approved by our coalitions for continued education. And I believe, Anasia, I don't know, I think it's similar for DA and SA, because Anasia is a domestic violence advocate and I'm a sexual abuse advocate, so we would be specialized. And I believe it's 20 hours every 2 years of continued education. You also have to have a minimum like contact hours with clients and a minimum supervision. So from someone who's already in a credit, like a certified advocate. So that's where like the bulk of our training is. We also shadow when we're new, we shadow seasoned staff.
Yes.
And that just to touch on like, what do we do in those emergency situations? We have helped people get safe transportation, whether that is through Uber or taxis, or particularly pre-COVID, but we have taken COVID precautions. If we are the ones that are going to make sure that someone is transported, we do have to consider staff safety as well in those cases. So if there hasn't been an arrest or the abuser is still in the home, we would have to get creative to make sure that everyone stays as safe as possible.
Right.
But we have done many things where we've made sure that we got someone into a hotel that has a lock if their locks are broken off, or if someone's like, I feel safe, I just need a new lock, we can help with the replacement of locks. There's a lot of different things that we can do to help someone who's in an immediate crisis situation. It's very dependent on the situation, but I would say all full-time staff are prepared and aware of a lot of different scenarios. Like I said, we're pretty hard to shock. So a lot of that shadowing, a lot of things. I've given people rides to our shelter space. Yeah. Depending on making sure that we brainstorm with that person, what's going to make the most sense for them and what makes the most sense for the access resources available at the time.
And a lot of our shadowing that continues throughout. So like somebody might have started and they got to shadow what we call the sexual assault or domestic abuse responses that we mentioned earlier. They might have gotten a chance to shadow that by going to a hospital or police station and helping walk through that immediate dangerous situation with the client. But then later a court thing comes up and they've never seen that. And it might also be an immediate dangerous situation where a perpetrator shows up that nobody was aware they would show up. And so just navigating that is also very situational, but that's why we have advocates shadow that as well. So like I might be going to court and I've seen that happen, unfortunately, way too many times. I would help a new advocate understand how to navigate that situation. And so we do that where it's kind of you're still getting trained on the job consistently. So that way advocates are still prepared to be able to help.
And we're not trying to weasel out by saying it's situational. It just really does depend on that person's immediate situation, because maybe someone does have a safe place to stay, but it's 2 counties over and it's out of our service area. That's okay. We will still help with that. And we will with permission from the survivor, we will make contact with other like neighboring agencies, or if they're wanting to go to another state and trying to contact them as well. And we work together to work on that survivor's needs, because that is the focus at that time. So we can go everywhere from like the little micro assistance, maybe we're helping you change a lock, all the way up to figuring out a way to transport you to a safe place that's out of state.
Other questions? I know we got what, about 7, 6?
Yeah. So, one of the questions is about outreach. How is Access getting its name out there, doing community outreach?
I wish we were doing so much better, but the pandemic really just kind of threw us all into a loop. But before that, I would say the best way was always directly planning events and having advocates at those events, and then interns as well. I enjoyed as a presenter going to classrooms and being like, this is Access, these are our services. We serve, anyone regardless of this, and this, and being able to be like, LGBTQ services, this is what we do. We can come to your club, we can talk to them about that. We can come to this event you're throwing. I think they had a, what do you call it? It was I forget what they called it, but it was like an all-inclusive prom they had around the corner here in Ames a few years ago. I think it was 2016. And so, going to things like that and letting them know like, hey, Access is here, so that hopefully you never need us, but now you know about us just in case, is some of the things that we do. Go ahead, Allegra.
Yeah, we also, so not just in the schools, since I do a lot of, so my role means a lot of different things, but we also have done awareness campaigns or just aware of access kind of campaigns. We table at events. I know that we tabled not just in Ames, but also things in Nevada. Our rural advocates are often doing things so we have folks who specifically work with the rural communities, and they'll be working with, like, for example, Marshalltown events, Tama County events, Boone events, making sure that they're there as well. I actually was at Ames Pride representing Access in 2018 and 2019, and I got rained on. It was great. And I will be there in some capacity, depending on what is safe in 2021, hopefully. But obviously wanting to make sure that we're keeping the community safe as well. We can improve. Yeah, it does rain every year at Ames Pride. You can't have rainbows without rain, so it's fine.
Right, the rainbow always comes out after.
Yeah, it's
so
great.
Beautiful.
So we are trying to increase our visibility just by doing more presentations like this. We know everybody's Zoom fatigued, so we understand that. We are going to be doing some distance in-person tabling at Iowa State. We're also trying to extend that outreach at places like MCC in Marshall County, and just having our name out there at different events. Our services, so if you want programming for your agency or your community, you have questions, you can reach out to us. So that is something that we do. We do not charge to do trainings. We do need heads up. We can't do it in a week, because we do have to prepare it and have conversations with presenters. And I personally am a statistics person. I didn't include any in here, but I like to have statistics and research, and that takes time. So we want to make sure we give you quality training or quality presentation. But if that's something you're interested in, absolutely, you can email me or Anasia while she's here, and then we can start that process and that conversation. I also work with mental health services as a representative of Access, reaching out to them, because that's also a vulnerable population. So that's something that I was working on really heavily before the pandemic, and those services are also very overwhelmed. So that's I've pulled back on that just so they don't feel like they have to balance multiple things. Right. But we are getting out in the community. I think because a lot of us are quiet people, I'm the exception. I think I are probably the exception. We may not always be as easy to spot as we should be, and that is something we are trying to improve. I know I've had conversations with folks who are like, oh, I thought you only served Ames. I'm like, no, we serve 5 counties. We really want to serve all 5 of those counties.
And we enjoy getting out there to serve those other counties. I mean, we even been out on the settlement before too, in Marshall County and Tama counties, being able to talk there at those events when they throw events there. I love when they invite us out. And so we just encourage folks to just keep inviting us to come in, and we'll keep reaching out to places asking, can we come in, just until everybody knows the service is there. So, hopefully you never need it, but the whole fire drill thing, so you're ready in case there is a fire. So in case you do need it, or a friend or somebody needs it, you can call us and get that questions answered and help somebody start their healing process.
Mhm. I know did you have another one to add?
No, I was just about to say we have probably time for one more question from the audience if they have any questions.
While we're waiting for that, I do want to address something that was in those pre-questions that I don't think got explicitly brought up. Someone mentioned that they'd only heard about us by referral from the police, which the police that we work with, particularly in Ames, but in our service area in general, will often refer people to Access. But you can call us. You don't have to go through an agency. You do not have to go through the school. You can call Access directly, calling one of those crisis lines. Even if it's the after hours, they will still get you connected to an advocate in the service area that Access serves. So that was a weird way to say that, but they'll get you connected to Access. You can call directly and ask for services. You do not need a referral. We're not like a doctor's office specialty. You can call us directly.
And that's the same thing with secondary survivors as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's so easy for them to get services as well, because anybody can call us. And like we said, again, you can call us and stay anonymous if you want. Yes, it's easier if we oh, your name's Allegra, because then I can be like, this person called, their name is Allegra and they need services and this is what happened to them, to my team, so that we can make sure they get served. But sometimes people call and just ask us all the questions first. And then at the end, when they feel more comfortable, they could be like, and my name's Anasia, by the way. And I would love a call back.
Yeah, we want to, again, that victim-centered service, that means that we're going to work around what makes sense for you. I always say we're like the GPS, and sometimes we might say turn right, and you're like, that's a silly direction to turn. And we go, okay, and then we'll adjust the route. Like that's kind of how we work.
One of the other parts of that question was what kind of information do advocates ask for or for you to provide? And what that is, like I said, we might ask your name, but you can always say you don't want to give your name at this time. But we probably will ask you for it. And then we always ask, is it safe to leave voicemails or to text a number if you give us a number? Same with if you give us an email address, we're like, is it okay to email this email address, or are you just providing it so that we have it? Because we want to make sure that they are safe with whatever contact information they give us. Sometimes people tell me when I call them back, just say my name. Luckily, my name is a little more unique. They're like, don't say what agency I'm with. And I'm like, that's perfectly fine. I'm like, hey, this is Anasia. Can I speak to Allegra? And then they're like, Allegra's not here. And I'm like, okay, thank you. They're like, gonna leave a message? No, thank you. And then they know Anasia called and they can call back without seeing Access. So we encourage a lot of our clients, if they have high safety concerns with that type of thing, to make sure that we have that discussion with them, like, what's the best way and approach you want for us to contact you back.
Access is also the name of an IT company in the area, which is kind of helpful. If people have concerns, like, who are you talking to? Access for what? IT. You can say that if you need to for safety. We know we'll understand that. We'll work around that stuff. We may also ask other questions as we get to know you better, but that's all kept confidential. It's for funding reasons. It's not, and so our supervisors know we're doing our jobs. But yeah, that's kept in like in confidential files. And you do not have to disclose anything that you don't want to work with us. I will, when I meet with someone, if I don't know what happened, but they've been referred to me, I assume that it was like a case that makes sense for my position. And I will let people know, you can tell me as much or as little as you want. That's really up to you. I can still provide services. Like you do not have to tell your whole story. You do not have to disclose your gender identity or your sexuality to receive services. Those are not required things.
And just a little plug at the end, follow us on social media. It's Assault Care Center on Facebook and on Instagram and on our website. And then Twitter, it's a little weird because, it's Twitter. So there's no E's in the center. So.
All right. Thank you so much for chatting with us, Allegra and Anasia. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to reach out and we'll try to get those answers for you. In the meantime, I hope you have a great evening and have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate the opportunity for this platform. Thank you. I'm so chatty. That went well. Thank you.